Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another in a series of events by the Michael V. Hayden Center at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. I am Mark Rozell. I serve as the Dean of the Schar School, and it's really great to see all of you here. We have about 400 people signed up for both the in-person and virtual participation in this forum, and those of you who are here have the added bonus of a nice reception after the event with our panel members and several of our Schar School faculty who are attending as well. The Hayden Center is a jewel of George Mason University. The quality of these programs, I believe, is among the best you will see anywhere in higher education. And we do it with leading policymakers and thinkers committed to addressing the most challenging public policy issues of the day, away from the often overheated debates and discussions in our national politics, so that we can develop informed understandings of key issues. And this kind of analysis is needed more these days, I think, than ever. When the Schar School was founded back in 2016, our benefactor Dwight Schar expressed his hope for programs such as these that are nonpartisan, non-ideological, and are all about good government and good public policy, wherever it comes from, regardless of party or ideology. And with that in mind, the Hayden Center was founded 6 years ago by former NSA and CIA director and Schar School professor, General Michael V. Hayden, who is with us here tonight. General. The Hayden Center has been a prominent voice in explaining and demystifying intelligence and security issues. And if you have missed some of our past programs, we have all of them on the Hayden Center website and on our YouTube channel. So thank you for attending. Hope to see you at future events here. And I now welcome to the stage the director of the Hayden Center, Larry Pfeiffer. Larry.
Thank you all for joining us. We've got a great event tonight. We have great speakers lined up for you, some of the more prominent speakers on U.S. intelligence, national security, and particularly Russia. Just a quick administrative remark, we are going to have time for audience questions. You probably noticed microphones in the two aisles, so when Michael indicates that it's time for you to get lined up and start asking questions, please just start queuing up at those microphones and he will alternate between the two sides. When you ask your question, we'd love you to let us know who you are, and if you've got an affiliation you're proud of, we'd love you to tell us what your affiliation is. But if you prefer to remain anonymous, that's fine too. For those of you who are watching us on our live stream on YouTube, you have an opportunity to ask questions as well. We would ask that you use the live chat function in YouTube and type your question there. We'll be monitoring those questions and we'll select some of those questions to be asked as well. Mark mentioned the reception afterwards for those folks who are here. A lot of great food, a lot of great drink, opportunity to chat with our guests as well as other members of the audience. For those of you at home, you're really missing out. Maybe next time we have an event if you're nearby, or if you're not nearby, travel, come here and join us. Tonight we're going to look at Russia, especially Russia as it has evolved under Vladimir Putin. General Hayden has said in the past that Russia in the national security arena, if you were to say that the national security arena is a poker game, that Russia is doing a damn good job at playing poker with like a pair of sevens. There are some who maybe even think that the Western world, the United States and our allies, maybe don't even realize we're playing poker. Maybe we think we're playing Go Fish. He's been able to have a lot of interesting successes in the international arena, a lot of interesting successes here inside the United States, but playing with a bit of a weak hand that should be acknowledged. We have some great guests here tonight. Michael Morell, a longtime friend of the Hayden Center and frequent moderator, will be leading the discussion. Michael, for those of you who don't know, was acting director and deputy director of CIA. He is the author of a great book about the global war on terrorism that you can find at Amazon or anywhere else you buy your books. He is the host of Intelligence Matters, The Relaunch, probably one of the best podcasts out there on national security and intelligence. And just this week, the University of Akron, which is his alma mater out in Ohio, just renamed its Center for the Study of Intelligence and National Security, the Michael J. Morell Center for Intelligence and National Security Studies. So congratulations on that, Michael. Now, George Mason University Schar School is probably better than the University of Akron, but but if you're looking to come to a school, go ahead and look at what Akron has to offer. That's fine. Our panel discussion here will be joined by Beth Sanner, the individual in the middle, if you couldn't figure that out. She is a former Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Intelligence Integration, which gave her the responsibility to oversee the intelligence community's analytic efforts and how well, and collection efforts and how well they're integrated. But a significant part of the job was also overseeing the development and presentation of the President's Daily Briefing to the President of the United States, and she herself served as the Principal President Intel Briefer during her tenure in that position. But she's had a lot of great jobs in her long career in the intel community. She was Vice Chair of the National Intelligence Council, which is a job title that she shares with one of our Schar School's own, Ellen Lapson. She had previous leadership positions in the ODNI, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Council, and State Department, including the Deputy for Analysis for Russia and European Affairs at CIA. She's got great expertise in the Balkans, and her time at the NSC was also working Russian issues as well. She is now a national security contributor to CNN. Some of you who follow CNN may remember Beth from appearances on some of their major broadcasts. Our other guest here is John Sipher. He's a repeat offender. He joined us back during the pandemic when we were doing our events virtually. He was here about a week or two before the actual invasion of Ukraine by Russia and had a lot of very prescient things to say back then, and I'm sure tonight he'll contribute some interesting thoughts as well. He had a 28-year career at the Central Intelligence Agency as an operations officer. In that time, he rose to the most senior leadership in the operations directorate, led operations with regards to Russia. He was several times a chief of station at foreign embassies and deputy chief of station. He was a lead instructor at the clandestine training school. He currently is the co-founder of Spycraft Entertainment, which is an effort to try to bring realism to movies and television shows that have to do with espionage, which can be a challenging thing. And maybe during the reception afterwards, he can tell you some interesting stories about working with Hollywood. Probably as hard to work with Hollywood as it is to work with some of these crazy foreign leaders we've had to deal with.
Harder.
He is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He is well published in major periodicals and newspapers, makes media appearances as well on CNN, MSNBC, and other stations speaking usually about Russia. He is a senior advisor to something called the Lincoln Project, and most notorious for being the captain of the four-time national lacrosse champion at Hobart
Exactly. There
Smith
you go.
College. With that, we'll turn it over to Michael to begin a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much.
Let me thank everybody for coming. It's great to have you all here tonight. General Hayden, another great event.
I'm doing this whether you say do it or not.
So I want to start.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just say something about those pair of sevens, right? Unfortunately, they're nuclear weapons, right? So those pair of sevens are a pretty strong hand, right? I guess we'll talk about that a little bit. So I want to start with the news. I want to start with the terrorist attack.
Sure.
And John, I want to start with you. Mm-hmm. The U.S. government, we know, provided a warning, right, to Moscow. You served in the field. You served in Moscow. How often do we do, not just to Russia, but more broadly, how often do we do those warnings? How detailed do they tend to be? What was the likely reaction by Russia, do you think? How do you think about that?
Well, sure, yeah. So a lot of people don't realize in the collection side of CAA, right, our job is to collect that subset of spy material that we have to steal. So if analysts can get material from diplomats and from experts and academics who visit and military attaches and stuff, there's a small subset of stuff that policymakers need to make policy analysis. to make policy, excuse me, and that small subset needs to be stolen. So I would say most people don't realize that of the things that the clandestine service puts out, the intelligence that the spy side of the agency puts out, probably 75 or 80% of it comes from partners working overseas, right? So we do have spies that are in places that give us information. Hopefully they're in the right places we need, but also we work with foreign security services, police services, military services around the world. And one of the things that we also do, even with places that we don't get along with, is a thing called duty to warn. So if we have information that is of an assassination attempt, a terrorist attack, or whatever, we share that information with those people, whether we like them or not. In fact, I remember stories of, back in the 90s when we were getting ready to invade Saddam Hussein in Iraq. There was assassination attempts that we caught wind of, and we would share that information with him. And I could imagine him saying, like, well, you guys want to kill me. Like, yes, we do, but
we have a duty to warn.
But we have a duty to warn you about this one that's coming out.
But not about us.
So in this case, I worked in Moscow. We share regularly with the Russian services. We don't get along with them. We're very frustrated about dealing with them. When we share that information, of course, we try to protect sources and methods. So information is put together to the extent that we can to give them as much as we can possibly give them that they might need while still protecting sources and methods, because we want to give up our sources around the world. So in this case, I'm confident that the station provided information to the services. Now, the relationships are really bad now. And so there's also the Russian mentality of, in their world, they would give us disinformation or bad information, or they would not share information with us. So they may assume that what we're giving them is bad, or they may assume that we act like they do, and we don't. So in this case, that information, I think, was shared, and then several days later, probably, there was a public announcement by the embassy telling Americans to be careful of a possible terrorist attack, and then Vladimir Putin subsequently publicly said that this was an effort by the Americans to mess with Russia or what have you. So, yeah, it's just a normal part of the business.
And I think that's exactly why, what you just said, is why Putin, 3 days before the attack, was published in TASS at an FSB board meeting. Sounds like something we would have. And he said, that information is, completely wrong, and this is just an effort to undermine our society. And I think it's exactly what you said, is that because he would view that in exactly the way he would do that information to us. This kind of like mirror imaging.
Yeah.
And so he didn't believe it.
Yeah, he should have looked at the Iran example, which just happened in January, where we warned the Iranians, and then there was an ISIS-K attack there, right? He had a data point staring him in the face. But I also wonder if it was so general that it would have been hard to act on, right? Probably just
that's possible. I mean, we look at 9/11. How much information was there to act? And so we gave what we could give. Yeah, that doesn't mean that it was enough for them to act. So I just don't know the details there.
And they did wrap up a couple of ISIS folks in the weeks before, including March 3rd. They picked up some people. March 6th, they picked up they killed some people.
Yeah. Trying to
So,
bomb
Beth,
a
what do you
synagogue.
think the potential political impact is here on Putin, if any? Are people making too much of this, do you think, or not?
I think that things are cumulative. And it's hard for us to see effects immediately, but that doesn't mean they don't matter in the long run. I think that this is, you don't want to have schadenfreude when innocent people get killed. So I don't have schadenfreude over it. But I am kind of happy that Putin's victory lap was brought to a really immediate, abrupt halt, and mid-lap, and he was shut down. And he looks terrible because he said this publicly, and to have the U.S. Intel Service look so much more competent than his own, and he is so personally tied to the intelligence services that's a reflection on him. I bet the man is seething. And I think that, in the coming weeks, if we see reorganizations, maybe they will finally go after the head of the FSB and remove him. I do think that Putin has problems with, might have problems with elite support, but it didn't show in this election because they got everybody to turn out and vote at the highest numbers ever. So I don't think it's an immediate thing, but I kind of believe that over time, it's not so much a popular uprising, but the elites can it's like the alpha dog, the alpha dog's limping a little bit.
If you've been in power for 25 years and you use repression and you don't have real elections, the one thing he can offer his society is competence, security. I'm a security professional, and essentially he's failed on all those things just recently, right?
Yeah.
And so that you never know, when that big bow that never seems to bend will break, but you keep adding things to it.
Do you think we'll see a response, John? An attack against ISIS in Afghanistan? Or not? What's your sense?
That's something they're going to be spinning with now. Because the one thing, and we can talk about this as we go on, the difference between countries that come from sort of revolutionary roots, like the Russians did, right, in the Bolshevik Revolution and things, is when they set up security services, those security services are about regime security more than national security, right? So their goal is to keep the leader in power at all costs. And so that's why you see LGBTQ groups being called terrorists, and Navalny being called a terrorist, and little old ladies being followed around to voting booths, rather than seeing ISIS-K people coming in to blow up a giant venue. And so now they're going to have to respond to this. You can see the initial sort of clumsy responses by, it's the Western security services in Ukraine and what have you. He's got to sort of read the room of the elites around him and whether the public cares or not, depending on how things are going, and try to re-pull in the fact that I'm strong and I'm the only one that can respond to this appropriately and stuff. So there may be something, but do they have the knowledge or the intelligence to know what to hit if you're trying to hit an ISIS? Maybe they'll bomb something in Syria or something like that, but I don't know what that buys them really with those groups.
And it undercuts the whole thing that he's trying to blame Ukraine. I mean, he said today, we've got these terrorists, but, they were really Ukraine.
So they were on their way to Ukraine.
They were on their way to Ukraine.
But you saw Lukashenko of Belarus actually undercut him today and says, they were on their way to Belarus.
Which is probably
true.
True, looking at the
and how much more can he do in Ukraine? He doesn't, that's the thing, is he's been attacking Ukraine for 2+ years now. It's not like there's a lot you could do that would change the calculus at this point.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Ukraine. Beth, let me start with you. It really feels to me, at least, that we're at an inflection point here in the war. What's your sense of where we are on the battlefield, where we're headed, and what's going to determine how this evolves over the next 6 months or so? Yeah,
and I think that for all of us, anybody who tells you that they know how this is going to turn out, there's a bridge that you can buy as well, because I don't think we can. There's so many variables here. And then you just add the friction of war, right? Very hard to predict where this is going. But I think it's pretty clear that the trajectory is going in the wrong direction, right? We can all agree, this is not going up. This is going down for Ukraine, and Russia has been able to stabilize and improve their situation in some aspects. And so, I think that, right now, obviously the supplemental has a big, big impact. And please don't say that there's $60 billion headed for Ukraine in military aid. There's not, there's 14. That is a number that is wrong. But today, the foreign minister said, pretty demanding and pretty begging at the same time. We need patriots, and we need them badly. But we also have to recognize that there are things that Ukraine is not doing that are essential elements to whether they ultimately succeed or not. And that is their huge manpower disadvantage and the fact that they are behind in dealing with that issue. And politically, it's a hot potato. I mean, it's a third rail. It's very, very difficult. People are tired. But they need to do that because they can't even stabilize the line going into next year, in my view, if they do not solve their manpower problem. So I see, major issues ahead. I think that we have to be careful that we don't think about the progress that they're making, the good things that are happening in terms of, taking out oil refineries and taking out ships. All those things are good, but they don't replace the ground war. They can't. And you need artillery for that.
Can I provide the other side of that in a sense?
I know, we're gonna.
No. I mean,
That's good.
you guys are analysts. You know smart
No,
stuff.
it's good. It's good.
But now we get ground truth.
But I know evil people like Vladimir Putin. So, I mean, a shift in the narrative. So you're right. Obviously, he's just had elections. The Ukrainian counteroffensive was, by all means, a failure. Of course, even the Pope says that they should start negotiating. Ukraine should start negotiating with Russia. All those things, the relationship with China. There's actually been GDP growth. Our sanctions are much more porous than we thought they would be. There's a lot of reasons to think things aren't going great. Russia's a bigger country. They're going to maybe get more people into the military and all that stuff. But at the same time, we all know from our experiences that dictatorships are often more brittle than they appear from the outside. And there's some things here that are just true that we just will never know when that thing comes. But they've lost, well over 300,000 people killed and injured in this war. Far more than they've had casualties since World War II. And if we remember Afghanistan, which was part and parcel of the fall of the Soviet Union, when the mothers of dead soldiers were coming together, and there was it was one of the pieces that led to the end of the Soviet Union. You're talking about 15,000 people who were killed over 10 years. Think of the massive difference that's happened here. So you got this vaulted, huge Soviet army they're so proud of. Now, yes, the Ukrainians weren't able to push them back, but at the same time, the Russian army hasn't been able to move in 2 years more than like a few meters forward, right? So it's not as if they're having great success on the ground. Yeah, they're blowing up a lot of apartment buildings and stuff, and it's awful and ugly, and the Ukrainians aren't in a great position. But Vladimir Putin has to calculate, if you're a dictator, is sort of, are the elites with me? I've now been in power for 25 years. I haven't run real elections, so I have no real sense of public support, right? You don't know when that's going to matter and how it's going to change. You have to continue to throw people in jail.
It's not 87%.
Yeah, you have to throw people in jail. You have to arrest them. All of his opposition people are either arrested or in exile or dead, which is true. But he has to take all this calculus in. And let's remember the Prigozhin mutiny, too. I think there's some things we can learn from that. So, as you recall, the head of the Wagner Group, a guy that Putin himself had put in to fight in Ukraine, probably to do the old-fashioned dictator divide and rule, right? So it's like, okay, I have the army chief of staff and the head of the army and these guys, and I need to control them, so I'm going to put my ally in there, too, so that, if one gets a little big for his britches, the other guy, I can support the other guy. And so Prigozhin then brings some of his troops, he's angry at the military, up through southern Russia towards Moscow. The FSB border guards either let them come across the border or were unable to stop them coming across the border. As they were moving towards Moscow, nobody seemed to step up to the plate for Vladimir Putin. Everybody sat either didn't do anything or sat back. I just think he has to wonder, when push came to shove, no one really came to my defense here. And, ultimately, because of Prigozhin's own personality, he was able to, he stopped, and then they were able to kill him and all those other kind of things. But it did send a signal through the system, probably to the elites and others, that, okay, maybe the support for Putin is less than I thought it might be. So yeah, I don't mean to suggest that we know, he's a powerful guy, but there are things that he has to worry about when he goes to bed at night about his actual control of things there.
Yeah.
So we made a joke about those two sevens being nuclear weapons, but at the right moment, he's always pulled this out, right, and threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. If you were with the president and the president said to you, "How serious should I take these threats?" What would your answer be? Beth, you go first.
I think that they are serious threats, but I don't think that they are a really huge risk right now. I think the actual, the point, this is the irony of it, is the point where Russia would be close to losing is where you have to worry about that. And they're not close to losing now, right? They're stable. And there's this question about, as John lays this out, the real question is, what's the theory of victory for Putin? What does he have to accomplish and by when, right? And I think that that theory of victory isn't like, I don't know, maybe not making a huge amount of material gain, but hanging in there until maybe the US election changes the whole scenario for him and he's able to negotiate from a position of strength. So right now, I'm not worried about nuclear weapons. I think everything that Putin is telling us, if you look at the words closely, if you look at their doctrine, it's all very consistent. And that is not, for me, a high level of concern. And I think that we have, yes, rightly been concerned about that, but I think we also have allowed that to dictate what we want in terms of self-deterring, and I don't think that that's been useful.
So if Putin got to the point, right, in their doctrine that would call for the use of nuclear weapons, right, Russian territory being at risk, I think is the way the doctrine works. Do you think he would have any hesitation?
Asking me?
You know him.
I think it goes. Yeah, I think it goes to your issue about the elites too, right? So there is a professional military class there that takes their job very, very seriously, and they have doctrine, and they have papers, and they study these things in their schools, and so I think they take that very seriously. And so you almost have to wonder if the military leadership sees him continuing to threaten nuclear weapons, and they know that doesn't actually fit with Russian doctrine. And the Chinese, who are essentially supporters of the Russians now, clearly probably don't want the Russians, talking about using nuclear weapons or actually using nuclear weapons. And I don't see a scenario by which this war is a threat to Moscow falling. Like, sure, if NATO decided we were going to invade and make our way to Moscow or something, nuclear weapons are a serious threat. But what I've seen, and I think we have misread Putin for years and years. He's been at war with us, at least in their terms called political warfare. He's been at war with us for at least 10 years or more in their version. And subsequent administrations, not just this one or the previous one, but even before, I think have misread Putin. And I think there's sort of this assumption we treat him like everybody else if we give him off-ramps and not lose face and all of those kind of things. If we just try to treat him with respect, he'll come around. And I think we now have learned that that's not likely to happen. He's not going to change. He can only be deterred at this point. But I think over time, when he is blustered and threatened, we've sort of backed off. Our desire to quickly get back to the status quo or hope things go back to normal has benefited him. So there's been a number of these crises over years where he's sort of pressured and threatened, and we've either backed off, and he's actually sort of moved forward on things here. And so this is just his game plan. He threatens these things because he knows that in general we back off and he gets what he wants. And so I wouldn't take the threats terribly seriously. I don't even think if he uses a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, it means the war ends. Like, what exactly does he hit? Ukrainians, This is life and death for them. They're not going to stop. No. The Chinese probably will pull back some support. I don't know, but I don't take it terribly seriously, no.
So there's a bit of a debate here between, about how important the outcome of this war is. Right, to the United States. Where do you guys fall in that camp, John?
I think it's incredibly important, both to show our willingness to support allies, to support our values, to support our this international world order and economic order that we've been building for years and years, ever since World War II. I think the fact that right now there are NATO countries and there are people supporting Ukraine who are questioning our ability to continue to support those kind of things sends signals around the world. I'm not saying anything you guys don't know. I mean, the Chinese, other people are looking at us saying, how serious are the Americans? Are the Americans moving towards a more isolationist thing? This concern, I think there was a view that the Trump administration was really unusual, and then perhaps when he left that would end. And now, of course, these people have to really take into consideration that maybe America is not what it was for the last 50 years. It's moving in a different way, and I find that very troubling personally.
Beth?
I would just add to the list, I agree with John, but this collusion between the different adversaries, I think people can take it too far. So I'm not one of these people like hair on fire that this is the new axis of evil. There are very big vulnerabilities and weaknesses in that collaboration. But that said, they are literally helping each other be stronger. You cannot look at our world and say, that threat is over there, and we need to figure out this threat over here, and not understand that these things are all connected. And so we make a huge mistake when we say, oh, we can't be fighting Russia because we have to put all our forces over here in Asia Pacific. Well, guess what? Russia is an Asian power, and if you lived in Japan and you worked on Japan, you would be paying attention to the fact that Russian and Chinese bombers and naval vessels are circumnavigating Japan on a regular basis now and claiming Japanese islands. Russia's claiming Japanese islands. So there's a reason that Prime Minister Kishida is one of the most ardent supporters of our fight in Ukraine. Because if you actually are an Asian power, you get it. And I would say on Iran, here we are in the Middle East, I'm kind of awaiting whether Russia and Iran are going to sign this state treaty that's been dangled out there for a while. Maybe I'll talk to some people. Ellen will tell me a little bit more later about that. But if Russia sends fighter jets to Iran, that's bad. They don't actually have air power. They have the largest missile force in the region. They don't have air power. I'm kind of worried about that. Right, so we've got to stop this bifurcation, this balkanization of our threats, and understand that they're connected, and we need to go after all of that. That's my lecture.
Let's keep going on that, right? Because that's one of the consequences of this war, right? Is the growing tie between Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, right? There is this little axis. Iran, North Korea providing weapons to Russia. How important is that to Russia? And then think about for a second the leverage that gives the Iranians and the North Koreans with the Russians, and what might they get in return. Aircraft is one possibility. What else do we need to worry about?
So clearly, I think one of the things that Vladimir Putin would like to come out of this, right, because he has had some success rebuilding his economy to sort of avoid sanctions, and he sees, I think, that he would like to be the leader of sort of a new world order that includes China and the global South and a non-Western world order. And this is part of it with China and Iran and North Korea is people who are working with in India and South Africa and some other kind of places, right? But the Iran, North Korea, China thing, they are allies because they all don't like the United States, right? And they don't like the West. And having lived in Russia, they're probably the most racist people in the world. And so for me to think that they are Vladimir Putin has sort of mortgaged their economy towards China. They're going to become a vassal of China, if not already, but before very long. And so the notion that Vladimir Putin thinks he's going to lead this world order sort of over China, I think is crazy. The Chinese are going to control this, whatever comes of this sort of new grouping of powers. There's nothing really that North Korea or Iran sell other than the military stuff that's helping Russia now that is part of a long-term economic benefit for all of these people. I think China's going to try to control that sort of grouping. I had one other thing I was going to say, but what I'll do is I'll cut you off in the middle of what you say.
You do that.
Yeah,
okay, you do that.
Yeah.
We've known each other a long time. So North Korea's today, the first confirmation that they're getting direct oil shipments from Russia. They have their weapons factories on 24/7 shifts. They're getting to test some of their weapons on the battlefield. That's always a good thing. Kim visited all the many kinds of munitions factories and space centers that would help all the things going on there. And I'm big on North Korea being an underappreciated threat. That's one of the things I've been saying for years, and one of these days I'm going to be right.
I keep on saying the regime cannot last. One of these days I'll be right.
So
It could
well,
be 50
I don't
years
know.
from now.
Yeah, exactly. One of us will be right.
I had a friend who served in Bangladesh, and when he would hear people say, like, I can't get any worse, he goes, I lived in Bangladesh. It could always get worse.
So I do think that there are, even though these are totally, marriages of convenience, and they don't trust each other. I mean, Catherine the Great didn't trust Iran either. That's the soft underbelly. Where's Professor Kozlerich as I'm saying these things, right? So I think that it doesn't trust, but that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be practical bad implications for them each getting things from each other. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I've had some folks in the Middle East tell me that they're worried about the provision of nuclear-powered submarines technology from Russia to Iran,
Yeah.
right? Which would give the Iranians an excuse to enrich at a much higher level.
Right.
Right.
And in terms of disturbing shipping, it'd make the Houthis look like child's play.
Beth, to John's point about how China sees all of this, right? It's interesting to actually look at the words that Xi uses when he talks about this relationship, and it's clear that he thinks he's the alpha dog.
Yeah.
So how do you see this relationship?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that the fact that he doesn't even bother to hide it anymore, I think that some of these meetings, you look at Putin and it's kind of embarrassing. It's not the way it used to be. And it's interesting because I do believe that the two leaders actually, they've spoken about each other as best friends. And I think that that's true. But I also think that all of these leaders are totally stunted as human beings. And so, their definition of best friend is not my definition of best friend. I wouldn't want to be at that birthday party. But, I do think that President Xi is winning, right? He's winning, but at the same time, it creates huge vulnerabilities for him and problems for him. Do you think that President Xi is happy about the Russia-North Korea bro fest? I don't think so. That is
even
not
just tying himself
useful.
to Russia, right? He's tying himself to a losing cause. Like,
Yeah, but also, China has a hard
Yeah, with
time
North Korea.
controlling Kim.
Yeah, of
a
course.
hard time. And, and the fact that Putin's going behind his back, doing that deal, and helping North Korea get stronger maybe in a way that could potentially complicate things for Xi, it's not good. I don't think he likes it. So I
And
think that
he's the
he's
big dog.
unhappy about a lot of things, but the fact is that, as you were saying, this is about not liking the United States. And so they have this kind of cabal, this anti-American cabal, going after the international order. And that's going actually pretty well in some ways, but in other ways not.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't overstate everything. We need to kind of pick apart that
I don't
stuff.
think they're natural allies.
They're not.
They only have two
historically.
things in common, right? One's a large energy exporter, one's a large energy importer. That's one. The other is this undermine the U.S., undermine
Yeah.
Western
Okay,
system.
so you just did better than we did. We blab, 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 and he's 2 points. Okay, that's,
But Iran,
yeah, that was good.
So, John, you said something earlier that I thought was really interesting, right? The fact that we have misread Putin repeatedly.
Yes.
What's his reading of us, and do you think he's got that right or wrong?
Yeah. I think he reads us better than we read him, and we can see that by how effective his sort of political warfare, active measures, those things have been against us. So they've invested, the Soviets and Russians have invested for years in spying and trying to understand the United States. And I think we saw, for example, in 2016 and 2020, that they knew enough about our electoral system that they knew where to place, how to use information, how to weaponize our own companies, and social media companies and other things against us. But there is, I think, he was a career KGB officer. He he does know, like when we talked earlier about the duty to warn and those things, he does know that relationship that we have, shared things with them. He does see he probably seen some real intelligence. They've had great sources that they've spied inside the United States. You know, long before we even had a security service, they had spies in the United States. So he does have the real information, but as time has gone by, he's created this sort of desire for this great old, Russian view of the world, that we need to control our neighbors, that this historic Russian thing that I think over time he's become much more sort of a believer in his own BS,
Yeah, and he has no one telling him anything near
Well,
the truth.
and that's a dictator thing too. Is like
It
no
is
one's
kind of
going
a
to
dictator thing.
You know,
We
and
should
so
avoid
at
that.
this point, there's only like a few people, and they're all former KGB guys that are in this little cabal
Right.
that really know what's going on. And so you worry over time that they're sort of spinning information amongst themselves, and he's not getting much from the outside.
We're gonna go to audience questions here. I'm just gonna ask a couple more, so if you guys want to line up at the mics, that would be great. John talked about the 2016 election, Russian interference. What do you think is going to happen this year?
Well, I mean, why would it be any different in a way?
Compare 2020 to
yeah, so-
2016, and then talk about
Right,
2024.
and so I think that, where we are now, so 2016 was the whole government effort by Russia to try to, influence the outcome. In 2020, Russia kind of shifted in some of their tactics, right? They started using kind of influence agents in order to propagate their messages. In the 2022 midterms, they actually moved away from kind of these influencing, using Americans to propagate their message, influence agents as much. And I think that's probably because it's harder to do when you're sanctioned behind walls. You've had most of your intel officers kicked out. It's no one in the United States except Tucker Carlson wants to go and hang out and shop in their great stores.
Grocery stores.
I mean, the bread.
Yeah, the best bread.
It's bread. It's amazing. So I think that has forced them in 2022 to shift a little bit back to kind of this combo of they're not doing these mass bots that they did before, but they're kind of using social media and influencers more as a remote social media thing. And they're doing much more in terms of demographic research and targeting particular communities where they think they will gain traction. I personally think that I worry about AI, not so much in this election, because when AI can help on that targeting of making not just the message more authentic, which is what they're doing now, but actually replicate messengers who look authentic. Right, so they're pretending to be the housewife that, is the soccer mom, but it's not that good. But AI can do that at scale. It can be someone's minister. It can be someone they recognize, right? It's that. We're not there yet. Until we get there, I actually am not sure how much of an impact it makes. Even though in the intelligence community, we would never say that.
Yeah. Sure.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, you don't look at the
No, we
US.
don't.
Yeah, but
yes.
also I think others have learned how effective sort of disinformation and lying can be. And we've gotten a lot more sort of malign actors in our own society that pump stuff around. So it's
This is
actually
the thing.
not really hard for the Russians like it used to be. It used to be they would, you saw even in 2016, they came over and they tried to create some false narratives and use specific people to push narratives to get involved in the election. Now all you do is you see all the bad actors in our own system, and you just exploit, amplify, and use their.
Amplify what's already here. But I'm not. I mean, like.
I don't know how effective it is.
Exactly. Like we have a lot of
In
Americans.
2016,
doing
there was such a focus in the U.S. government on counterterrorism, as we all
Yeah.
know, and so that I don't think that sort of focus on Russia. I don't know if we would have picked up this anyway. It was sort of a new way of doing active measures, but now there's been a whole world in schools they're studying disinformation and all these other kind of things. So I think in some ways we're better prepared for it, and others, just bad actors are out there.
Okay, so let's go to questions. name, affiliation, if you want to share, and your question, please. So let's start over here. How are you?
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Preston Golson. I spent a career formerly of CIA, now in the private sector. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Tucker Carlson interview. I was interested in that one because Putin had opportunity to speak directly to people in the West and he spent the first half an hour of that conversation talking about the last 700 years of Russian history and so forth. Did you find it surprising how seemingly not prepared he was to sort of really speak to the opportunity he had to sort of push the same sort of narratives that many people in the West would find some sort of solidarity with, especially those in certain parts of the political spectrum?
You're better placed on that, Mr. Media.
Oh, I think you look at his response to these attacks in Moscow. I mean, he really looks like an old lounge singer trying to pull out his old best hits and no one wants to hear anymore. And for years and years, people like Beth would take secretaries of state and people would go to places like Moscow and stuff. Putin is known for going on and on, giving these long history briefs. No one tells him that it doesn't work with other kind of people. So, yeah, I'm not surprised he did that. Like we talked about a dictator over time, you don't really change your game. That's Vladimir Putin. And I do think it's having less and less impact. And
I mean, who's going to say, Vladimir, it's not so good. That didn't go well, or, bring down the history stuff, okay? It's a one-way ticket to jail.
He does. That's not rhetoric for him. He really believes that stuff, right?
Yeah,
So he has an opportunity to speak to the American people. Nobody's going to tell him not to do that, but he also believes deeply what he's saying, and he wants to share it.
Yeah.
It's a very Russian thing, this Russian history. I remember one time I was at an event and Michael was there and he asked a question about, is Putin something new or is he part of sort of the longer Russian history tradition? And I remember talking about it, and one of the things, all of U.S. ambassadors up until his death would go up to Princeton to see George Kennan, our most famous diplomat, right? And he had been the ambassador in Russia, the early Cold War. He wrote sort of our first treaties on how to deal with the Soviet Union back then. And every ambassador getting ready to go to Moscow would take the trip up to Princeton. And they would go to see him, and they would always say, well, sir, what should I know before I go to Moscow? What should I read? How should I prepare? And reportedly, he would always say the same thing. Kennan would say, I want you to go to any academic library, the Firestone Library in Princeton or any other, pull out any book from the 18th or 19th century on Russia. If you read that, all you need to know about modern day Russia, or modern day Soviet Union. And it's really true. Another Princeton scholar, Stephen Kotkin, writes that, like, if you look at Russia today and you look at Russia in the 19th century, you have the same thing. You got, autocrat, you have fear of foreigners, you have militarism, you have, a nasty sort of secret police. All of these things are sort of part and parcel of, the way they believe, and they've always believed in empire. If you look at Russia since the time of Ivan the Terrible, 16th century, Russia has grown at about 50 square miles a day for like 400 and something years. It's always been an empire. It's always been growing. It's always had to, to be a threat to its neighbors. And again, Kennan also said, for example, if you happen to be a neighbor of Russia, you can only be a vassal or an enemy. And if you're not one, you're going to be the other. And so this stuff is inculcated in Vladimir Putin, and he almost sees himself as a modern day czar, I think.
And Gorbachev and Yeltsin were the blips.
Yeah, sadly. We thought it was going to be.
They were the blips.
Yeah.
In a long history.
Thanks. Adam Tabeka, Shore School alum. In a similar vein, so the CIA's predecessor, the OSS, did a very prescient psychological profile on Hitler. What's the CIA's psychological profile of Putin, if that's not classified?
Well, tell us what you guys think. Maybe not what the CIA thinks.
I definitely remember editing that.
Really? Then you answer.
I cannot.
Oh, please.
I'll have to
you
kill
don't remember.
everyone.
You
That's
don't remember.
a big, that's like a theater kind of massacre. We can't do that. You go.
Don't be looking at me.
You just gave a great answer about Russian history, so keep going.
I think that Russian history is part and parcel of the thing. The question is he truly a believer in the things he says? And I think that's what analysts would be trying to look at. I do think now that he actually was willing to take this incredible gamble to go into Ukraine, and in many ways has failed, suggests that he really believes these things, that Russia has to be expanding, Russia has to take over all the lands where Russian speakers are, and these other kind of things, which most people probably in this day and age would not have taken a thing like that. So I think there's scholars and probably people in the intelligence community look at him, and they're going to look at sort of the history of autocracy and how dictators think and how they have people around them and all those kind of things. So there's that piece of it. There's the specific Russian piece of it, and then there's the KGB piece of it, which is really important because Vladimir Putin is a Chekist, which is the word for a career intelligence officer or security service officer in Russia. And so, like I mentioned, that the Russian security services came from this revolutionary route. So I've talked to like classes and stuff, and I talk to them and I ask, do you guys know who Lev Bronstein is? And do you know who Vladimir Ulyanov is? And Yusuf Jugashvili? And you guys probably know these things, but that's Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky. And the reason we don't even know their real names is because we know their names from as they were revolutionists. They were terrorists. They were underground terrorists trying to kill and take over the Tsarist regime. So when they came into power, the first thing they did was create a nasty security service. And the head of that security service even publicly said, "We are about state terror. Our job is to make sure that there is no opposition in this country, that we keep the leader in power at all costs." And because they were, the powers at the time, Germany and Europe, were much stronger than revolutionary Europe. They had just taken over this massive continental-wide country, and Churchill even said, we need to strangle the Bolshevik baby in its cradle. From the beginning, they used those terrorist tactics, right? The tactics of looking for weak places to hit, to try to do damage from the inside. And so Russian security services have become a state within a state, which is all about protecting the Kremlin, and it's all about trying to make sure there's no opposition at home and to damage their enemies from the inside. And Vladimir Putin, he grew up with that about deception, disinformation, agitation, assassination, all of the things that we've seen. That's him. So I think you got a dictator, you got someone who's sort of a corrupt kleptocrat, you've got a Russian historian who thinks they're part of the larger sort of world of Tsardom, and you got a career KGB officer, and all those things are together inside of Vladimir Putin.
And I think that from the beginning, you have a person who is a
weenie.
What?
He's kind of weenie looking.
Oh, weaselly, kind of,
Yeah.
right. But a person who was dismissed, who was
Not
weak,
that successful.
Not that successful,
And that must weigh on him.
struggled,
It would be like
not a good family.
It would be like one of us when we were like a mid-career at CIA. All of a sudden, you're the president of the United States, right? Think about.
That's scary.
Like we would have said like, no, we shouldn't. Doesn't make sense. But
I like Andrew Weiss's book, which is a graphic novel that really talks about kind of, I'm being on the psychology part of these things, and I think that always is woven in. We all are, in part, products of where we come from and how we think about ourselves and how do we explain our own story. And I think that's kind of a good book for that.
Please.
Yeah, I'm Mike Allen. 24 years ago, I worked for General Hayden at NSA. I will preface this by saying I haven't had a clearance in a long time. I have a very close friend who grew up in Moscow, and she is a psychologist. She lives in the United States. She's a citizen now. She has a visceral hatred for Putin. She called me up and said, and she's convinced that Putin was actually behind the Crocus City attack, that there's so many indicators from her perspective. The slow response, the fire suppression system didn't work.
The opposite.
The police station's 500 meters away. There's a National Guard center 10 minutes away. Nobody showed up for like 30 minutes. Nobody posted the car for like 3 hours. The extreme damage, it's a good target, one way in, one way out. But she's talking about Putin after Navalny's death was a little shaken by the reaction. People in the street calling him a murderer. So he gets to sort of turn the population sentiment against Ukraine. He gets to increase strikes on Ukraine. He gets better support from his friends because this is the biggest strike, right, terrorist attack in Russian history. A little attack wouldn't do him as much good. Now, I don't know that I buy her her explanation, but I do see so many things that are hard to explain about the response. I'm just curious about what your analysis is of why it was such a poor, slow response.
Never ascribe to conspiracy what can be explained by incompetence.
I think,
I personally, I don't buy it. I think actually the slow response, if you did it, you would be pretty much ready for your response. I think that's an argument actually the other way. You don't wait 19 hours to speak and have to fumble around and try to figure out what your story is and then change the story again. It feels very much like Prigozhin. So I don't think you speak out 3 days beforehand and make yourself look like a fool and make
That's what
yourself
I
look
told them.
culpable. Literally, if we were in America and the president spoke out and said, nothing to see here, there would be families that would try to sue the president for killing their families that were victims in that. So, I mean, not that that could happen, but I'm just saying, it's like, I think that he would have waited. He's completely capable of doing this. I believe in
that's
1999.
that's where it comes from.
In 1999, I personally believe, not based on intelligence, that he was responsible for at least some of those bombings that he blamed on the Chechens, and that led to war, which is actually why Putin is where he is today, right? So you can trace it back to like, oh, that's a playbook that worked, but I don't think that makes sense right now. I
Just
could
as
be
a
wrong.
follow-up, what would you see as the advantages that he's going to get out of this now that he's spinning it?
I don't think he gets any advantages out of this.
Go back. So
Do you?
that's exactly right. So I think there's a reason people think like that.
Sure.
Is because that's how he's operated, and he's lied consistently for the last 25 years. And so in the 1990 apartment bombings, it's likely that the FSB, which he was the head of up until that time, was involved in this issue. But then you move forward, the sinking of the Kursk submarine, complete lies about it. The Beslan terrorist attack in 2004, lied about it, cracked down on civil society and the media. Move it forward, moving into Crimea and lying about it. The shoot down of the MH17, it's just constant lying, constant putting out false information, constant disinformation. You create that mindset that they can do anything, and the security services are all about those kind of games. So I understand why people go there. I don't think in this case, I agree with Beth, I don't think it makes sense in this case, because it's hard to see what real benefit he gets out of it. Like, it would allow him to crack down more in Ukraine. What really could he do?
He doesn't need another excuse, does he?
Yeah, no. He can always create a fake thing to crack down on something, right? I think it probably scares him. He's probably going to crack down more like he usually does after these things internally.
Yeah, you don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so you're gonna I think we'll see ramifications of this, but that doesn't mean that he did it. But that's,
again,
but we could be wrong.
The services are about regime protection, it's about regime security, not national security. So the Fed, they'll probably follow all the grandmas around, make sure they're not, carrying a little sign against the war as opposed to going after ISIS. So the fact that they screwed this up, it doesn't surprise me in the
And they
slightest.
screwed up, they killed more people at Beslan, and at the
They killed
theater,
them, yeah.
they were responsible for more deaths than terrorists.
In their
I
response.
mean, in their response, like what the last thing you want is for the Russians to be efficient responders to a mass casualty event, because that is not going to go well for any victims.
When I lived in Moscow, you don't want to go to the hospital.
But I also
there either.
need to let John promote his new podcast about conspiracies.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
in fact,
this
you
is
guys
a
need
good
to have
one.
you guys on. So, yeah, so we have a podcast called Mission Implausible, which is about conspiracy theories. So I have another former colleague, and you know Jerry O'Shea, when he was inside, former chief of station in Baghdad and Berlin and a number of other places. So he and I, sort of the conceit is we're a couple of old grumpy spies that talk about conspiracy theories. And so we have Adam Davidson from the New Yorker, and the three of us interview people to talk about everything from Jewish space lasers to chemtrails to elites living under the Denver airport to Hunter Biden's laptop to all these different things. And so, yeah, it's doing pretty well. So please sign up. Mission
up.
Implausible.
Great, thanks.
Sign up.
Apple or iHeart.
You're going to talk about questions that are coming in online.
Absolutely. So, is this on? So we have a question from YouTube from Roger Nichols. He raises the question of NATO. What role does NATO have in deterrence? Should aspirational members such as Georgia be fast-tracked to limit Russian expansionism during or after the Ukrainian war? I would then add into that question, what about Ukraine and membership in NATO? And what about the issues that the Republican nominee for president has with NATO, and how does that play into this situation with Russia?
Ugh.
Deterrence.
Michael, are you allowed to answer some of these things too?
No,
So
I'm
we
not
don't have
allowed.
to
You guys are the experts.
Come on.
Look, deterrence is clarity that you will exact costs on your adversary if they do something you don't like, and that cost equals or outweighs what they're doing. So it requires clarity, it requires coordination and assurance to your allies, and it requires follow-through. You got to do what you actually say you're going to do when you have that clarity. And we're struggling in this in this realm of traditional deterrence, and some of it makes sense because it's hard. Some of it doesn't make sense because we're not doing a very good job, I think, in consistency, clarity, communication, all of those things. I don't think we're, I'm not crazy about where we are right now in a number of different places. But I think that one of the problems we have is that the tools that our adversaries are using against us in this gray zone, hybrid warfare, those kinds of things, it's making it much harder for us to figure out how do we deter those things, because the tools in our toolkit are very limited. And when those kinds of acts don't take lives, and you already have Russia being the most sanctioned country in the world, you don't have a lot to work with. And I think we need to be developing more tools and more, we have to have more thought about coordinating our responses to those things. On NATO, NATO expansion. I mean, for Ukraine, I think that there's one thing that's very clear. We have to figure out how to create a path that has security guarantees. And the way we did that at the last NATO summit, in my view, has not worked. But we do not have societal agreement for Article 5 in NATO and in Ukraine as it stands right now. In other words, what would we do? And so, if Russia continues, does a strike on Kyiv, we have Article 5, this is hard. And so I think that there has to be some kind of, clarity that when the war ends, there will be that security guarantee. But we cannot provide that as we're in an active war.
Yeah.
I would just add, so I think credibility is the key, and I do think there is, we are damaging the credibility of NATO being able to respond, but Vladimir Putin understands very well what is NATO and how far he can push. And part of the problem is, was it 2008 or 2009, we offered that to Ukraine that, we're going to put you into NATO someday, which sort of put it out there for Vladimir Putin, but never actually put them into NATO. So it was sort of a freebie potentially for him to take before they're in NATO, because you don't see him going into Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Poland, these kind of places. I think he understands that, he's perhaps doing better in Ukraine than he was, but he can't really take on NATO. So I think the credibility in his mind of NATO is serious, but it is undercut because it really is about willingness, credibility, and if presidency of the United States don't say that the United States will not support the things that we say we're going to support, then that credibility is weakened.
Yeah. Please.
Hi, Harry Stevens, Institute for the Study of War. So is
Great organization, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you
have
for the-
very little. I just started, so I can't take credit for much.
All right. Good choice. Place to work.
But I was going to say, so Central Asia, in kind of the decades after the Soviet Union collapsed, was an area of an area of Russian influence that has in recent decade or so come to increasingly be kind of an area of Chinese influence. As Russia continues to become more economically reliant on China, do you see that balance shifting affirmatively? And also, as a kind of follow-up, do you see I think one of you might describe it as Russia's vassalization to China. Do you see that? What kind of effects do you potentially see that creating in both, for either Russia or China?
I'm going to just say that, just in a way, I'm answering the question I want to answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
We were
That's
talking
what you do
about
when
that
you're on
before.
TV.
She's doing her CNN.
I'm really bad at this. But anyway, I think on Central Asia, one of the things that we are missing is the fact that the economies in Central Asia, other than Kazakhstan, are doing so badly that this is why Tajikistan is becoming, the exporter of ISIS and ISIS-K. That place is worse than, anyone can remember. And I think we kind of at our peril are thinking about these countries as some kind of like pawns in this great power competition and not really understanding that local dynamics have a power of their own. And ISIS-K and Hamas and other groups get a vote. And so we can move these things around the chessboard, but if we actually don't take the time to understand and deal with, we've got to be able to, juggle with our hands and our feet. And it's hard right now, but this is important. And we're kind of missing the dynamics going on here because we're really too busy thinking, too big in the great power competition and not really paying attention to understanding that these countries have issues. We're not picking up Armenia. The French are doing it on the Caucasus.
So
we're kind of like, whoop, we're not home.
I was just going to add, so when the Russians and Putin believes he's going to be sort of work with Xi to be part of this new anti-Western world order, I think this is an area for friction, right? So in the Russian mind, these places, they look down on them. They should be kissing the ring of the Russians. But of course, the Chinese are richer and are doing things there. And so I think this is going to be a place where the Chinese will come out more ahead, and it's going to cause friction between China and Russia, who are supposed to be, best friends now.
It's also a place where Iran wants influence, right? So
Absolutely, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's our great power competition, but it's actually the kind of axis competition. And I thought it was really interesting that President Xi, his first trip out of the country, and he was going to go meet with Putin. Where did he go first? He stopped in Kazakhstan, right? And then the Kazakh president, went, and Russia's effort to save them during their little revolution, that didn't buy a lot of credit, did it?
No, Kazakhstan was more supportive of Ukraine early on. So.
Exactly. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Please, next over here, and then Barry, I'll come back to you.
Hi, my name is Green Choi. I was encouraged by Professor Mark Katz to attend this event today. In our class, we talk a lot about different regions of the world, the relationship between Russia and other parts, including the Middle East and Africa. And I was curious what your guys' thoughts on Africa was. They've now, Wagner have rebranded themselves as African Core. And it seems like Russia has been very much involved in these areas of the Sahel, Niger, Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso. And so I guess my question is, should the American people be concerned with this realignment and these African military leaders disrespecting international norms and institutions, or is there another way maybe American people or the American leaders can approach this diverging interest with the African leaders? Thank you.
Let me just add to that, John. Russia's interest in doing what they do in those kind of places, right? Is it simply money, or is it geopolitics?
Good question. I want to hear what Beth has to say too. I'll just go quick because I don't have a lot. But yeah, I think Wagner was doing quite a bit there, and it was sort of this mixture of corruption and statecraft, right? So they were able to make money. They were able to, as part of their providing security guarantees to these sort of groups there and the leadership in these different countries, they would get into mining interests and these other kind of things. And essentially, Wagner was essentially a piece, part and parcel of the Russian military intelligence, GRU. That's sort of now come out, more clearly, and they've sort of taken over officially for the Russian state. And they seem to be very aggressive in Africa and also be playing a lot of games in the Balkans for that matter too. And so there's always two pieces to Russian, or maybe three pieces to Russian foreign policy. One is to mess with the West, so if it can deflect and get us focused on other things to keep away from their core interests is one. One is corruption and to make money so Putin can pass off money to his cronies around him so they continue to keep supportive of him. And the fact that he wants to, he misses the days of the Soviet Union where they did play a worldwide role. And so as each year has gone by, they've done more and more of that game.
Yeah, and I think that there is an actual geopolitical play. I mean, as I hate the phrase global south, I think it's kind of dumb, but I do think that, Africa and having Africa, support Russia in the General Assembly, be part of whatever remnants of feeling like it's an empire and he's somebody, like African leaders still, travel to Moscow and show up at his receptions. That's really important to an autocrat and a leader. But I do think that these places are easy to manipulate in a way, and Prigozhin in particular had invested quite a bit already into the media. I mean, they were a full-service organization. You get your security guards that protect your leaders. You get like a little anti-terrorism, and we'll manipulate your media to make sure you win any election. So there was all this infrastructure there. I think that the Kremlin's done actually a pretty good job in taking it over. It's gone better than I expected because I thought it was a little bit more complex than that. But yeah, we should be doing something. But it's very, very hard when your partners are coup leaders. It's like, well, you shouldn't be, hanging out. Well, actually, we don't want to hang out with you either. So I think that that's part of the problem. I mean, the turn back of democracy and the number of countries now that are no longer democratic or, headed way in the wrong directions, number of coups in the Sahel and other parts of Africa, it makes it very, very hard for us to compete with China and Russia in these regions. And that's a problem. And that's just why, for example, the United States has this libido corridor with Angola, of all places. And the leader of Angola is, interested in engaging with us, and that's going to help us out.
I remember just one quick thing. I remember after 9/11, when there was, all of a sudden, I was working in Russia House doing worldwide Russia stuff in Moscow, and there was obviously huge focus on terrorism. It changed quickly overnight. I remember talking to Mike Sulik, who was the head of sort of Russia things at the time. He says, and we were trying to get some stuff. We had some big cases doing some stuff with Russia, and it was sort of harder to get up to the 7th floor. And he goes, don't worry. It's the Russians. They'll always screw something up, and it'll come back around. And so, I think on some of these things, the Chinese and the Russians investing stuff in Africa, they will screw that shit up at some point. So, it isn't,
Unfortunately
we'll
for the people of Africa, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we have three
that.
more questions. So let's be quick with the
Lightning round.
questions and quick with the answers. Larry.
Okay, from another YouTube viewer, Kelsey Marie Bell. She asks, what do you experts think about Evan Gershkovich? Or rather, what is the best way to bring him home for President Biden to do so? I guess I would broaden the question to ask, is this a strategy on the part of Putin and the leadership to arrest these Americans? We have Paul Whelan over there as well, and hold them on trumped-up charges. And
The answer is
and what is
yes.
the
Yes, they're hostages.
Yes.
Hostages.
You got to pay a lot to get them back.
And that has implications.
And then they'll take more.
And then they'll take more.
Yeah.
Don't go to Moscow.
The pattern's pretty clear by this point.
Yeah, please.
Good evening. I'm Gabriela Grabowska, Ukrainian student here at the Shar School. And Mrs. Sanner, you talked about how something that Ukraine is losing in is manpower. And how do we solve that? Like, even people in my closest circle are getting brought into the army. France talked about potentially sending their soldiers into Ukraine, but obviously we're running out of weapons as well. We can produce more, but we cannot give birth to people and train them in such a short period of time. So how possible do you think is international involvement, especially now when we're running out of people? And what do we do? Thank you.
I mean, you don't have to, thank you for being here. And, you know, when I am being honest, it doesn't mean that I want it to be so. But I do feel that sometimes, especially with Ukraine, it's hard to sometimes, I think, for people to be blunt about the difficulties. And that's not always good, right? Because I think everybody wants so much for Ukraine to win, and all of us are very frustrated about our own political paralysis that has made it harder. But I think that, you know, there are specific things you need to do. You do need to lower the age of recruitment. You do need to put specific terms of service in so people can come back. The people who have been at the front have been there since the beginning. They have not rotated back. You know, there are very specific things that need to be done, and some of those are in the laws that are under consideration. Some of them are being done by the new chief of staff, but it's already 6 months or a year behind schedule. So they need to pass the legislation, just like we need to pass ours.
But what do you think about French soldiers? Sorry.
What do I think about what?
French soldiers.
I don't think that that's really what we're talking about. I think that Macron is using strategic ambiguity and trying to deter, but I don't think that we're talking about French soldiers. I mean, you know, that's not something that one should count on.
Please, last question.
Dominic Cardella, no affiliation. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine obviously took quite a bit of planning. I'm just wondering what you think, if at all, Trump's role was in Putin deciding to invade Ukraine.
I don't think that Putin thinks anything about what we're thinking about. I think
You don't think that Trump at that time gave Putin the green light to proceed?
I've never heard that.
I don't think so. I mean, I think Putin now is in a place where, you know, your points about Ukraine are very well taken, but the Russians are sort of stuck too. And so he's biding time and waiting and hopes for the thing to change. And I believe he truly hopes that Trump wins so that support for the Ukrainians is pulled out from under him. So I think Trump plays in his calculus right now. In terms of invasion, I think there's so many other pieces that were in place. Maybe his ability to think that he could continue to manipulate United States public opinion or keep us fighting each other so that we're not paying attention, those might have been part of it. I've never heard anything about Trump being part of it.
I think it was just an internal, his decision to go was based on what he wanted to do to restore the empire. I don't think it had very much to do with us. If it did, he would have negotiated when we gave him that offer right before he went in. I mean, in fact, Putin was at his very strongest negotiating point the month when he was sitting on the border and we were all begging him to negotiate on European security. He could have insisted on changing a lot on European security architecture. But he didn't pick up what we were putting down because he didn't want that. He was bent on his own plans. It had nothing to do with us and nothing to do with NATO.
You guys are great. Thank you so much. You really are.
We didn't tell any personal stories. I have some Beth stories about when we were classmates.
I was very young. I deny everything.
So thanks, Michael, for doing a great moderating job. Thank you, Beth and John, for joining us. Audience members, you did hear we've got a couple of podcasts up here you can follow. We've got a CNN national security contributor you can watch on television on occasion.
Please watch CNN so I can keep my salary.
There you go.
How much do they
And
pay you?
some are on social media. We're on social media. Just you pick a social media, we're probably there. So if you're not following us, please follow us. If you'd like to know about our events ahead of time, go to our website and you can sign up to receive emails getting first notice about the events. Or as you're walking out, we got a little sign that's got a QR code. You just take a picture of the QR code and you can get signed up very quickly. For those of you in the room, we got a great reception across in the multipurpose room. Please make your way over there now. Give our audience, or give our panel members a chance to get their mics off and get a little settled, and they'll come over and join you in just a moment. Thank you.